In the modern day, there are very few examples of surviving battleships, all of which are American, with the notable exception of Mikasa. If you wanted to see the interior of a European battleship, well, you're kind of out of luck there. However, a few years back, the Italian Navy released a set of photographs. Photographs that showed the interior of Roma. These pictures show an incredibly fancy and well-appointed ship. The title of the video isn't a joke because a lot of these pictures look right out of a contemporary ocean liner. Roma's ending may have been an unfortunate one, but while she was afloat, the ship was beautiful on the inside and the outside. I'll note as we begin that this won't be like the shipwreck videos. I won't be spending as much time on each individual picture. With that note done, let's start with the engine room. Even here, Roma looks surprisingly fancy, for lack of a better term. Part of it is the fact these pictures were likely taken before the ship had seen much use. And of course, museum ships tend to not put as much focus on machinery spaces. Even so, Roma's engine rooms just look nice if you like that kind of thing. Even the ladder looks fancier than you'd otherwise expect. Say what you will about the Italian Navy, but they clearly spared no expense on their battleship. Then again, that's true of the entire engine room. Control equipment is well made and placed with plenty of space around it. Everything is laid out to provide room for the crew, while the equipment itself is clearly new and the best Italy could afford. The more mechanical equipment, the turbines, the engines, and other such things, are similarly good looking. Like I said before, some of it is almost certainly these pictures being taken when the ship was new. Even so, it makes a striking comparison if you look at photographs of ships at war. Or, alternatively, visit a modern museum ship. No grime, no men rushing about, and the equipment is in perfect shape. It's a shame the pictures are in black and white. Understandable, of course, but still a shame. Imagine something like this picture, with all its piping and equipment, in real color. It would probably still largely be black and white, but the point remains. Moving away from the mechanical bits, the control spaces are just as fancy. The telephone and headsets here look quite modern for the time, and this room here has everything it needs. Laid out in an easy-to-follow style, with space for each man to work at his station. Warships, no matter how large, tend to be cramped affairs. And yet, the Italians gave plenty of space for the crew. That's something we'll be seeing more of as we move forward. That said, before we move on, I think the most Italian thing about Roma's engineering spaces come from this set of pictures. I mean, just look at it. Recliners and finely upholstered chairs. A nice wooden desk. The engineers here weren't covered in engine oil or breathing in dangerous fumes. And then you have this area with a nice fold-out couch that looks at home in a 1940s house, while being surrounded by various bits and bobs of military equipment. In fact, if you pay attention, you can see that this is the same room with the phone and such from earlier. Wouldn't have believed they had a couch in that counter, am I right? Definitely sparing no expense in this battleship. Now keep in mind, as we move on from these pictures, that this was just the engineering area. Believe me, you haven't seen anything yet. Let's start with this picture of a meeting room. A nice table, fine wood cabinets, and several bookshelves. There's a fan on the wall, joined by nice lights on the ceiling, which is, itself, disguised to look less like a ship and more like something in a hotel. Probably the most striking things to me are the large model of Roma herself on the wall. and the fact the portholes are in alcoves with cloth blinds. This entire room is a giant fire hazard, writ large. And yet, I kind of love it. If not for the portholes, you could be forgiven for thinking this wasn't a ship. This continues with another, even larger meeting room. Here we have more portholes in alcoves, a larger meeting table, and an incredibly fancy circular ceiling. Even the support pillars are shaped like classical columns, because why not at this point? It also wouldn't be this period of Italian history if you didn't have Mare Nostrum plastered on the map of the Mediterranean, behind a presumably bronze statue, because again, why not? It almost takes away attention from the other desks and fancy chairs, right out of an old sitcom. Mussolini's Battleship Vacation, coming to theaters never. I'll admit I'm joking a fair bit in this video, but really it just fits when you look at things like this. It's beautiful, undeniably so, but at the same time, keep in mind that this is a battleship, expected to get up and brawl with the enemy, with massive shells flying every which way. It makes for an interesting contrast. Although it should be noted, a lot of the worst offenders for fire safety would have been removed before going into battle. Frankly, other angles just reinforce that point. You have the shape of a battleship, filled with fancy chairs and fine glass. Even the phone on the table doesn't look at all military. Again, I love it, but it does seem out of place. That general theme continues with the other crew spaces. A mess hall that looks out of a fancy restaurant in Rome, for example. Nice tables with decent chairs. And then alcoves, presumably for the higher ranked officers, with more comfy chairs and natural lighting. It's all very pretty. The same holds true for the officer quarters, as seen here. Tell me this doesn't look like an ocean liner. Actually, this might even be fancier than an ocean liner's first class cabin. Those needed to be smaller so you could fit more people aboard. This looks like a living room ashore, if you can ignore the portholes. The walls are even done up to look like a classic home, not a warship. As we continue on, this only gets fancier and fancier too. Look at all of these nice chairs clustered together. They even have different designs in the same room, which are themselves different from the ones we saw earlier. The Italians didn't have to go that extra mile. If they were going to put nice chairs on the ship, they could have just used the same design for all of them. Instead, they went the extra step. And then, on that topic, they put more couches in as well. If the last picture looked like a living room, this looks like a fancy study in a manor house. A nice meeting table, several well-stocked bookshelves, and a fancy couch beneath an equally fancy painting. Roma's officers probably had nicer quarters on the ship than they did ashore. Especially when you see an office like this one. If you told me this was someone's study in an old castle, I'd probably believe you. Aside from the portholes and the fact you can't hide the shape of the ship. The officer's bed, meanwhile, is right out of a nice hotel room. 2 nightstands, with one complete with a phone. The bed itself is fancier than anything you'd expect on a warship. And the thing is, I'm not even sure if this is the captain or admiral's quarters, or just an officer's room in general. Which is telling when you think about it. Even the less fancy office looks nice here. A bit smaller, maybe, but still quite nice. With the same holding true on the bedroom, which is connected to the office. You wouldn't expect something this nice back then, for sure. What's really telling, though, is that even the smallest of these personal offices still managed to stuff in a nice cabinet and couch. As seen here, complete with a rug on the floor. It really does speak to how much the Italians gave their officers on these ships. I have no reason to doubt the other members of the class were any less fancy on the inside than Roma was. Now, all of these pictures have been of officer quarters for what that's worth. I haven't found any pictures of the quarters for the enlisted men. I imagine it would be a lot of shared bunks and things like that. Probably not hammocks, but then again, the Italian military wasn't exactly known for giving the enlisted men fancy stuff. The officers, yes, but not the enlisted. With that said, let's round off the video with a couple images of the sickbay. This is just as well appointed as anything else on Roma, with modern equipment. Proper lighting and sanitation areas. Operating tables and storage for whatever the surgeons might have needed. Even specific rooms for different needs, as seen here. The Italians managed to find the space for a set of bunks for sick or injured sailors, with even these looking fancy. It's almost more impressive than the officer quarters. However, with that said, we come to an end for this video. I'll link an album of these pictures with some more that I didn't work in. It really is quite something to look at, even if you assume a lot of the fancier stuff was removed prior to going to combat. Roma was every bit as fancy and nice looking on the inside as she was on the outside. Italian shipping through and through. Thank you for watching. Remember to like, comment, and subscribe if you enjoy the content, and I'll see you in the next one.